A woman hired a contractor to repaint the interior of her house. As she showed him through the second floor, she told him which colors she wanted for each room. In the first room, she said, "I think I'd like this room in a cream color." The contractor wrote it down, then walked over to the window, opened it, and yelled, "Green side up!" He then closed the window and followed her to the next room. The woman, confused but not saying anything, continued the tour. "In this room, I was thinking of an off blue," she said. Again, the contractor wrote it down, walked to the window, opened it, and yelled, "Green side up!" In the next room, she requested a light rose color. Once more, the contractor went to the window, opened it, and yelled, "Green side up!" Now, really curious, the woman finally asked, "Why do you keep yelling green side up every time I tell you the color I want?" The contractor replied, "Because I have a crew of blondes laying turf across the street." A brunette, a redhead, and a blonde all worked in the same office for the same female boss. They noticed that every day their boss left work early, so they decided that one day they'd leave right after her. After all, she never called in or came back to the office once she left early. How would she know? The next day, the girls followed suit and left as soon as their boss did. The brunette was thrilled to be home early and spent the evening gardening before going to bed early. The redhead was ecstatic to squeeze in a quick workout at the health club before meeting her dinner date. The blonde was happy to get home, but when she opened the bedroom door, she heard a muffled noise. Quietly, she cracked it open and was horrified to find her husband in bed with her boss. She slowly closed the door, crept out of the house, and spent the evening thinking. The next day at coffee break, the brunette and the redhead asked, "Are you coming with us to leave early again today?" The blonde shook her head and said, "No way! I almost got caught yesterday. A policeman was testing 3 blondes who were training to become detectives on their ability to recognize a suspect. He showed the first blonde a picture for 5 seconds, then quickly hid it. "This is your suspect. How would you recognize him?" he asked. The first blonde replied confidently, "That's easy. We'll catch him fast because he only has one eye." The policeman sighed. "That's because the picture shows his profile." A little flustered, he then showed the second blonde the same picture and asked, "How would you recognize this suspect?" The second blonde giggled and said, "Ha! He'd be too easy to catch because he only has one ear." The policeman, growing impatient, snapped, "That's because it's a profile shot, too. Are you both this clueless?" Finally, he showed the third blonde the picture and asked, "This is your suspect. How would you recognize him? Think carefully before answering." The third blonde studied the picture intently and said, The suspect wears contact lenses?" The policeman was stunned. "Wait, how did you know that?" The blonde smiled and replied, "It's obvious. He can't wear regular glasses because he only has one eye and one ear." It was George the mailman's last day on the job. As he made his final rounds, he was greeted with thoughtful gifts from each house. At the first house, an elderly couple gave him a gift certificate. At the second, a family presented him with a set of fishing lures. At the third house, he received a box of fine cigars. But at the next house, a stunning blonde in a skimpy negligee greeted him. Without a word, she beckoned him inside. She gently took him upstairs and they made passionate love. Afterwards, she led him downstairs and made him a hearty breakfast of toast, sausage, eggs, and hash browns. George was thoroughly satisfied, and as he leaned forward to grab a second cup of coffee, he noticed a dollar bill sticking out from under the cup. Curious, he asked, "This is all wonderful, and I appreciate it, but what's the dollar for?" The blonde smiled and explained, "I asked my husband last night what we should give you for your retirement. He said, 'Screw him. Give him $1.' She beamed at him and added, "The breakfast part was my idea." A golfer playing in Ireland hooked his drive into the woods. While searching for his ball, he stumbled upon a little leprechaun lying flat on his back, a big bump on his head and the golfer's ball beside him. Alarmed, the golfer rushed back to his cart, grabbed his water bottle, and poured it on the little guy to revive him. The leprechaun blinked, groaned, and asked, "Oh, what happened?" "I'm so sorry," the golfer said. "I think I hit you with my golf ball." "Oh, I see," the leprechaun said, sitting up. "Well, you got old Patty here fair and square. You get 3 wishes. What do you want?" Relieved, the golfer smiled and said, Honestly, I'm just glad you're okay. I don't want anything. I just want to apologize for hitting you. The leprechaun, impressed by the golfer's kindness, thought, what a nice guy. He decided to grant the golfer the three things he would want for himself: a perfect golf game, all the money he could ever need, and a fantastic love life. A year later, the golfer found himself on the same hole, hitting another errant drive into the woods, and there, waiting for him, was the same leprechaun. "'Twas me that made you hit the ball here," the little guy said with a wink. "But tell me, how's your golf game now?" The golfer grinned. "It's fantastic. I'm an internationally renowned golfer now." "Well, well," said the leprechaun, "and how about your finances?" The golfer beamed. "Money's not an issue anymore. I just reach into my pocket and there's always a $100 bill waiting for me." The leprechaun nodded. "Good, good. And how's your love life?" The golfer blushed slightly and said, "It's great, really. Everything's going well." The leprechaun raised an eyebrow. "Come on now, don't be shy. How many times a week do you do the deed?" The golfer's face turned even redder as he mumbled, "Well, once, maybe twice a week." The leprechaun stared in shock. "What? That's it? Only once or twice a week?" The golfer sheepishly replied, "I mean, I'm doing pretty well for a Catholic priest in a small parish." There was a preacher who loved golf, a true enthusiast. Every chance he got, you'd find him out on the course, swinging away. It became an obsession. One Sunday, the weather was perfect for a round of golf. The sun was shining, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the temperature was just right. The preacher found himself torn between his duties and the irresistible urge to play. Finally, he called his assistant and claimed to be sick, explaining he couldn't make it to church. He packed up his car and drove 3 hours to a secluded golf course where no one would recognize him. As he stepped onto the first hole, he was thrilled to finally get in a game. Up in heaven, an angel noticed the preacher's decision and was none too happy. The angel went to God and said, "Look at the preacher. He's skipping his duties. He deserves to be punished." God nodded in agreement. Down on the course, the preacher teed up his ball and swung. It soared through the air, landing perfectly in the cup, an incredible hole-in-one from 350 yards out. He stood there in awe, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. The angel looked on, astonished, then turned to God. "Begging your pardon, but I thought you were going to punish him." God smiled and replied, "Think about it. Who's he going to tell?" Two friends were about to tee off when one of them noticed his partner only had one golf ball. "Don't you have at least one more?" he asked. The other guy shrugged. "No, I only need this one." "Are you sure?" the friend asked. "What happens if you lose that ball?" "This is a very special golf ball," the other guy explained. "I won't lose it, so I don't need another one." "Well," the friend said, "what if you miss your shot and hit it into the lake?" The guy smiled. "This golf ball floats. I can just fish it out no problem." The friend raised an eyebrow. "Okay, but what if you hit it into the trees and it gets lost in the bushes?" "No problem," the guy said confidently. "This ball has a homing beacon. I'll find it easily." The friend, growing more skeptical, asked, "All right, let's say we're playing late, the sun goes down, and you hit it into a sand trap. What then?" The other guy grinned. "Simple. This ball is fluorescent. I'll be able to see it in the dark." Finally convinced that his friend really only needed this one magical ball, the friend asked, "Okay then, where did you get a golf ball like that?" The guy looked at him with a smile. "I found it." Jenny was sitting at home, reading her favorite magazine, when an ad popped up for an all-expenses-paid cruise for only $500. Excited, she ran to her husband, Jack, and showed him the ad. "Look, Jack, it's in 2 days and only $500. Jack looked at the ad and said, "Honestly, I have too much work to do. How about you go and have a good time?" Though a little disappointed, Jenny quickly decided to go alone and enjoy herself. The next day, Jack was at work when his co-worker and mistress came to him just as excited. "Jack, there's this amazing cruise tomorrow for only $500. Jack sighed. "I'm really not into cruises. Here's $500. Why don't you go have a good time?" She agreed, and off they both went. Jenny and Jack's mistress, Brenda, were going on the same cruise. A few days later, Jenny returned and began telling Jack all about the fun she had, showing him photos from the trip. As Jack flipped through the pictures, he noticed Brenda in the background of some of them. He pointed to her and asked, "Who's this?" "Oh, her," Jenny sniffed. "I call her the cruise slut because she slept with half the men on board." The next day, Jack was back at work and Brenda showed him her photos from the cruise. As he flipped through, he saw a familiar face, Jenny's. He pointed to her and asked, "Who is this?" Brenda smiled. "Oh, her. She's such a nice woman. With all the men on board, she never left her husband's side for a second." An infinite loop is a computer programming concept where cause and effect continue forever. In real life, though, these loops don't happen, unless a company CEO tells his secretary, "Next week we're going to a convention abroad and spending some quality time together. Please make all the arrangements." The secretary calls her husband, "Next week the boss is taking me abroad for a business trip. Take care of yourself while I'm gone." The husband calls his lover, "My wife is going abroad for the week. Let's spend the time together." The lover, a private school teacher, tells the students, "Because of a personal issue, I won't be at school next week. You'll be studying from home." One of the kids runs to his grandfather. "Grandpa, no school next week. You promised we'd go to the mountains together." The grandfather, also the CEO, calls his secretary. "My grandson wants to spend the week with me. We won't be going abroad after all." The secretary calls her husband. "The boss canceled, so we'll be together, my love." The husband calls his lover. "We can't spend the week together. My wife's staying." The lover tells the students, "I've sorted my problem out. School is back on." The kid runs to his grandfather. "Sorry, Grandpa, school's back on. I can't go." The CEO calls his secretary. "My grandson won't be able to spend the week with me. Rebook the flight." And it goes on and on. A 16-year-old teen comes home with a brand new Porsche. His parents are shocked and immediately start yelling. "Where did you get that car?" they demand. The boy calmly replies, "I bought it today." "With what money?" his father asks, incredulous. "I know how much a Porsche costs." The boy shrugs. "This one only cost me $15. The parents go even crazier. "Who would sell a Porsche for $15? The boy explains. "The lady up the street. I don't know her name. They just moved in. She saw me riding my bike and asked if I wanted to buy a Porsche for $15. "Unbelievable," gasps the mother. "She must be out of her mind. Paul, go over there and find out what's going on, and you, young man, should be ashamed of yourself for taking advantage." The father marches up the street to the house, finds the woman in her yard planting flowers, and introduces himself. "I'm the father of the boy who bought the Porsche for $15. What happened?" "Well," she says, "this morning I got a call from my husband. I thought he was on a business trip, but turns out he's run off to Hawaii with his secretary and doesn't plan to come back. He asked me to sell his new Porsche and send him the money, so I did." A stoner is walking along the beach when he stumbles upon an old, dusty lamp. Curiosity gets the best of him, so he picks it up, gives it a rub, and poof, a genie appears. "Mortal, you have summoned me, and you may have 3 wishes, the genie says, eyeing him seriously. "What is your first wish?" The stoner, already in a relaxed mood, grins. "All right, for my first wish, let's smoke a joint together." The genie, slightly surprised, shrugs. With a snap of his fingers, a joint appears, and they light up, passing it back and forth, soaking in the ocean breeze. After a few minutes, the genie asks, "What's your second wish?" The stoner, eyes half closed, nods. "For my second wish, let's smoke another one." The genie obliges, conjuring up another joint. They chill even deeper into the moment. Once it's finished, the genie clears his throat. "So what's your third wish?" The stoner thinks for a second, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Okay, for my third wish, let's smoke one more." The genie raises an eyebrow but goes along with it. After they finish, the genie, now looking a bit baffled, says, "You've had your 3 wishes, but here, take these," and hands the stoner a box of chicken nuggets. The stoner blinks. What's this? The genie smirks. Your fourth wish. I'm not totally out of ideas. A huge, muscular man with a tiny head walks into a bar and orders a beer. The bartender hands him the beer and says, I have to say, I'm not gay, but your physique is incredible. I have to ask, though, why is your head so small? The big guy nods slowly, clearly used to the question. Well, one day I was out hunting and got lost in the woods. I heard someone crying for help and found it was coming from a frog sitting by a stream. I picked up the frog and it said, "Kiss me and I'll turn into a genie and grant you 3 wishes." The bartender looks intrigued. What happened next? The man continues. So I kissed the frog and poof, it turned into this beautiful naked woman. She said, "You now have 3 wishes." I looked at my scrawny 60 kilograms body and said, "I want a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger." She nodded, whispered a spell, and poof, I was huge, ripped out of my clothes, and standing there naked. She asked, "What's your second wish?" The man grins, remembering. I looked at her and said, "I want to make sensuous love to you right here by this stream." She agreed, and we went at it for hours, really going for it. Afterward, as we lay there next to each other, exhausted and sweating, she whispered, "You still have one more wish. What will it be?" The big guy smiles, leans in closer, and says, "How about a little head?" A firefighter was working on the engine outside the station when he noticed a little girl nearby in a red wagon with little ladders attached to the sides and a garden hose coiled in the middle. The girl was wearing a firefighter's helmet. The wagon was being pulled by her dog and her cat. Curious, the firefighter walked over to take a closer look. "That's a nice fire truck you've got there," he said with admiration. "Thanks," the girl replied proudly. The firefighter peered closer and his eyes widened in horror as he realized the girl had tied the wagon to the dog's collar and to the cat's, well, let's say, more delicate parts. "Little partner," the firefighter said gently. "I don't want to tell you how to run your rig, but if you tied that rope around the cat's collar, I think you'd be able to go a lot faster." The girl thought for a moment, then nodded. "You're probably right," she said. "But then I wouldn't have a siren." A poor elderly woman, desperate to avoid eviction, began rummaging through her belongings to sell anything of value. As she dug through a dusty pile, she came across an old, dull copper kettle. Intrigued, she dusted it off, and bam! A genie exploded from the kettle's neck. The genie, his eyes glowing with magic, spoke, "I have seen your troubles, and I will grant you 3 wishes." The woman, still in shock, thought for a moment, then said, "Age has taken its toll on me. I wish to be young and beautiful again." Bam! In a flash, the old woman was transformed into a stunning young woman, full of energy and vitality. Elated, she said, "Genie, I want to live a life of grandeur, to be rich." Bam! The room swirled as her old, broken cottage turned into a magnificent mansion. She looked down and saw herself dressed in fine, elegant clothes, her feet adorned in sparkling heels. The genie, now standing with a solemn look, spoke again. "You have 1 wish left." The woman thought deeply, then felt a soft brush against her leg. It was her old cat, startled by the transformation. Looking up at the genie, she said, "This cat has been with me through thick and thin. Please turn him into a human man so we can spend many happy years together." Bam! In a burst of light, the cat was gone, replaced by a tall, handsome young man with dark hair and piercing eyes. The woman was overjoyed and immediately fell into his arms. As they locked eyes, the man whispered softly, "I bet you wish you hadn't had me fixed." One day, a young woman walked into a dentist's clinic. Without a word, she sat down in the chair, unbuttoned her shirt, and removed her bra right in front of the shocked dentist. The dentist's jaw dropped as he quickly turned away and stammered, "Miss, what on earth are you doing? I'm a dentist. I only deal with teeth." The woman, completely calm, replied, "Oh, I know that. I'm here because there's a tooth stuck in my nipple and I need it removed." An Aussie trucker walks into an Outback cafe with a full-grown emu behind him. The waitress asks, "What can I get you today?" The trucker replies, "A hamburger, chips, and a Coke." Then he turns to the emu and says, "What about you?" The emu responds, "Sounds great, I'll have the same." A short time later, the waitress returns with their order. That'll be $9.40, please. The trucker reaches into his pocket and pulls out the exact change, paying her. The next day, the man and the emu return. The trucker orders a hamburger, chips, and a Coke. The emu says, "Same for me." Once again, the trucker reaches into his pocket and pays with the exact change. This routine continues every day until Friday night, when the trucker says, "Tonight I'll have a steak, baked potato, and a salad." The emu, without hesitation, replies, "Same for me." A while later, the waitress brings their order and says, "That'll be $32.62. The trucker, as usual, pulls the exact change out of his pocket and places it on the table. By now, the waitress is dying to know. "Excuse me, mate, how do you always manage to pull the exact change out of your pocket every time?" The trucker smiles and says, "A few years ago, I was cleaning out the back shed and found an old lamp. I cleaned it, and a genie appeared. The genie offered me 2 wishes. My first wish was that whenever I needed to pay for something, I'd just reach into my pocket and the right amount of money would always be there." The waitress is impressed. "That's brilliant. Most people would wish for $1 million, but you'll always have exactly what you need, no matter what." The trucker nods. "Exactly. Whether it's a gallon of milk or a Rolls Royce, the exact money is always there." Curious, the waitress asks, "And what about the emu?" The trucker sighs, looks at the emu, and says, "My second wish was for a tall chick with a big rump and long legs who agrees with everything I say." An old woman took her husband to the doctor. After checking the husband's pulse, the doctor told the woman, "I'm sorry, your husband is dead." Shocked, the woman said, "I don't believe it. Are you sure? Can you do any other tests?" The doctor nodded. "We can do some additional tests if you want." "Yes, I need to be absolutely certain." The doctor shrugged, walked to the door, and yelled, "Send in Mrs. Fluffkins." In walked a black house cat, who jumped onto the examination table. The cat casually walked across the unresponsive body of the husband, swatted at his face a few times, meowed twice, and then walked out of the room. "Just as I thought," the doctor said. "Dead. Send in Walter." In came a Labrador retriever. The dog sniffed the husband's dangling hand, turned to the doctor, shook its head, and walked out. "Dead," the doctor confirmed. "Now send in Colin." Suddenly, a towering Aussie in safari gear burst into the room. He raised binoculars to his eyes, took one quick glance at the husband, then turned to the wife and shouted, "Oi, Bush, your husband's fooin' dead," before walking out. "Thank you, Colin," the doctor said, making a note on his clipboard. Then he yelled down the hall, "Ma'am, please come in." An elderly woman with thick glasses entered, glanced at the husband, shook her head, and sat at a typewriter in the corner. After typing a few seconds, she pulled out a card and handed it to the doctor. The doctor read the card and said, "Dead. Thank you, ma'am. That'll be all." The doctor suddenly stood up, picked up his stool, and swung it over his head, crashing it onto the husband's body. The body flailed for a moment before settling again. He set the stool down, made another note on his clipboard, and said, "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband is definitely dead." He handed the woman a piece of paper with the test results. "Take this to the front desk, and they'll check you out." The woman took the paper to the front desk, where the receptionist gave her a sad look. "I'm sorry for your loss. That'll be $32,000. $32,000? That can't be right. I've never paid that much for a doctor's visit." The receptionist looked over the paper again. "Well, it's a $100 copay for the visit, but then you also requested a CAT scan, a lab report, a colonoscopy, a mammogram, and a stool analysis. An Englishman, an American, and a Japanese man are whitewater rafting when, out of nowhere, they spot a huge drop leading to a waterfall they didn't know existed. They're mere moments away from plunging to their doom when, suddenly, a genie appears. The genie explains, 'I am the spirit of the waterfall. I have limited power. While I can't stop you from going over the edge, I will grant each of you one wish before you die. The American is first to speak. I love my country. Before I die, I want to sing my national anthem one last time, the full version. Give my friends lyric sheets so they can join in, and bring in a full backing orchestra and a gospel choir to really do it justice. The genie nods. It will be done. Next, the Japanese man steps forward. I love my country as well. Nothing represents it better than our wonderful cuisine. Please let me taste one last time the delicacies of my village. Fermented sticky soybeans, fresh sea urchin, raw horse meat, pickled seaweed, sugared omelets. And please, provide enough so I can share with my friends. The genie nods again. It will be done. Finally, the Englishman steps forward, leans in toward the genie and whispers, just send me over the waterfall before the bloody song starts and the food gets here. It was Tim Simmons's retirement dinner, and everyone was celebrating a life well lived. At just 25, Tim had embarked on a mission trip to South America, where he met two young boys who he later adopted. The trip opened his eyes to the harsh realities of life in the region, inspiring him to pursue medicine. Tim excelled in his studies, eventually developing vaccines for over 10 deadly diseases. With the wealth he earned, he didn't keep a cent for himself, instead donating it all to relief funds for the places he had visited. Tim was loved by everyone who knew him. His coworkers often said he was the most positive and inspiring person they'd ever met. So when an angel appeared during his retirement dinner, no one was particularly shocked. The angel spoke. You've lived a life of selflessness, helping countless people and spreading hope. As a reward, we will offer you one of 3 gifts, a long and healthy life, unlimited wealth, or unparalleled wisdom. Tim paused for only a moment before quickly choosing wisdom. The angel touched his forehead and, without another word, vanished. The room was quiet, the guest still processing what had just happened. His closest friend, a coworker who had always been by his side, broke the silence. So, how do you feel? Tim stood still, staring ahead, lost in thought. After a long pause, he finally muttered, I should have chosen the bloody money. A man walks into a bar looking really down. As he approaches the bartender asks, What's the matter? The man sighs deeply and says, Well, I've got these 2 horses, and I can't tell them apart. I'm mixing up their riding schedules and even feeding them the wrong food. Feeling sorry for the guy, the bartender thinks for a moment and suggests, Why don't you try shaving the tail of one of them? That way you'll be able to tell them apart. The man wipes away a tear and says, That's a great idea. I'll give it a shot. A few months later, the man walks back into the bar, looking even worse than before. The bartender, concerned, asks, What happened now? The man responds, I shaved the tail of one of the horses, but it grew back. Now I can't tell them apart again. The bartender, now a bit exasperated, says, Why don't you try shaving the mane? That might help, since it might not grow back as quickly. The man, a little more hopeful, drinks a few more and leaves, thinking he's got it figured out. A few months later, the man returns to the bar, completely distraught. Without waiting for the bartender to ask, he says, I shaved the mane of one of the horses, and it grew back. The bartender, fed up and trying to be patient, finally yells, For heaven's sake, just measure the horses. Maybe one is slightly taller than the other. The man glares at him in disbelief and storms out of the bar. The next day, the man rushes back in, grinning from ear to ear. It worked, he exclaims. The bartender, relieved, says, So what happened? The man replies, I measured them. The black one is 2 inches taller than the white one. The bartender sighs, shaking his head. Finally, something simple.